Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you another episode review from the classic Are You Afraid of the Dark television show. And this episode comes from season 3. It was written by Susan Kim and directed by the legendary Ron Oliver. And the episode in question is The Tale of the Curious Camera. Now, The Tale of the Curious Camera is an episode I've seen one time before making this video for review purposes. And I have to say, this time around, I grew to appreciate the story a whole lot more. If only because I don't think that Are You Afraid of the Dark ever puts much emphasis into like origins or explanations of what things are in terms of the villains. Often than not, they're kind of thrown into the story and the kids, kind of learn things over time. And that's mostly the case here, but I feel like for an object-focused story, Are You Afraid of the Dark was able to pull something off that Goosebumps hardly ever does, and that is like, maybe not going too much into the origin of things, but definitely giving operational idea of how these objects work. And honestly, seeing like the main character being Eddie K. Thomas, who starred in the American Pie movies, and seeing Richard McMillan, who will later star as Spidey in the Say Cheese and Die episode, also directed by Ron Oliver. This is such a fun episode from the show, honestly. And the fact that Ron Oliver directed Say Cheese and Die and this episode, two stories centered around evil cameras, in some different ways, of course, is really cool, in my opinion. And this honestly won me over, and I quite love this. So if you have not seen The Tale of the Curious Camera, please go watch this episode. I highly recommend it. It might not hit for everyone, it might be kind of tame, but I think most will enjoy this. So let's start off with the plot overview without giving too much away. So the story starts off with the Midnight Society gathering around, doing their usual hijinks before the narrator of said story has their turn to tell one, and they sit around the campfire and they throw the dry dairy creamer onto the fire and say the story. And the story is about this boy, I forget his name, but he's played by Eddie K. Thomas. Like I said, he was the main actor and or one of the main actors of the quartet of friends in the American Pie movies. He is waiting in a line of basketball players to get school pictures taken. And I don't know if he's on the basketball team or not, but he is dressed in normal clothes and all the other players are dressed up in their jerseys. And one guy who you might recognize also in Say Cheese and Die as one of the bullies, or if you're a diehard Are You Afraid of the Dark fan, the main character from The Tale of Laughing in the Dark. He squirts ketchup on his face and forces the main character to go sit down and take his picture with ketchup on his face. And the photographer is played by Richard McMillan. Like I said, he went on to play Spidey in Say Cheese and Die. And the kid is mortified that he had to take his school photos in that fashion. So when he gets his photos back, he decides he's not happy with them, and he tries to visit the studio of Richard McMillan's character. And when he goes there, it's revealed that his photos came out invisible. And the photographer's like, well, since you're invisible, the photos never lie, right? And that's a weird choice. But he's like talking with the photographer saying like, I need to take a reshoot of my photo. And he's like, no, there's one per customer. But what I can do is I can give you a camera. And he opens up this safe, and inside is this very old like Polaroid prototype camera from like the 1940s with a huge lens on it, and it has a very early like photo dispenser on it. And he gives it to the boy and says, hey, you can keep this, or I'll just give it to you to use for whatever reason, right? So the kid takes the camera, and he realizes pretty much the next day that this camera has this weird ability. His sister is coming downstairs to say hi to him, and he took a picture of the vase beforehand, and he's looking at the photo, and while he's looking at it, the vase crashes in front of his sister, and it's revealed that the photo that he took was actually of the broken vase on the ground and not the vase standing on the shelf. So he kind of plays around with the idea that the camera might have some type of abilities to will things into existence, which, when he takes a picture of something, something bad's going to happen to it. So he's snapping photos around his house. He takes a picture of a window and a baseball breaks through it. He takes a picture of a fish tank and it catches on fire. There's a couple things, right? And he realizes that the camera might have some supernatural abilities, and he gets scared of it and tries to throw it away because he's like, this might be too much power for me to undertake. So the next day, he's in a locker room at school, and of course his school bully comes up to him when he opens his locker, and he finds the camera is just chilling in his locker, and he's like, well, how did that get there? And the bully's like, taunting him, trying to mess with him, and he's like, you know what, you're a real jerk, snaps a photo of him, and then awaits, the prime opportunity to see if this photo comes true. And after they're done doing basketball practice, the bully's in the locker room, and one of the lockers fall on top of him and crush his leg, which is kind of dark. And the kid, checks the photo, and it's of his bully lying on the ground, and he gets this idea that maybe he could start using this to get revenge on all the people that bullied him at school. So he has like a school photo, and he's like crossing red X's on it, trying to come up with a plan of who deserves to get their picture taken and all that, which is really warped and dark. And his sister comes out of nowhere, and she's like talking with him about the camera, and he decides to tell her about the camera, and she's like, yeah, I don't believe you. But the camera goes off on its own and takes a picture of her under a chandelier, and the chandelier falls and breaks, almost hitting her, but luckily he was able to save his sister beforehand. And he realizes that this camera might be a little too dark to handle. So he decides to take it back to the photographer he got it from. But the photographer, ever since he got rid of the camera to the kid, has had a new lease on life. He's been more successful. He's not a yearbook photo photographer anymore. He's like a big shot. And this is probably one of the best parts of the whole episode, is seeing Richard McMillan just having so much fun in this role. And he pretty much info dumps something to the main character, who him and his sister started noticing all the photos after the incident with her almost getting hit by the chandelier and seeing this gremlin image on it. And the photographer pretty much explains that the gremlin image was in all of his photos, and ever since he acquired the camera, it was like it chose him, and it gave him like a life's worth of bad luck until he was able to find somebody that the camera wanted instead. And it's chosen the kid now, so there's nothing he can do about it. So him and his little woman lackey run off, and the kid's like, all right, well, there's something I can do about this camera. So he takes it home, and before he can walk into his front door, his mother and father are about to go out to the movies, and he accidentally snaps a photo of them. And he looks at the photo, and he realizes that something's going to be terribly, wrong for his parents. They're probably going to get in a nasty head-on collision with a truck or something. So him and his sister look at the image, and his sister tries to destroy the camera, but the camera reappears pretty much intact, and they realize that they were running out of time to handle this, until the main character gets a bright idea to use a mirror to have the camera take a picture of itself to see if the creature or whatever's causing the evil inside the camera, inside of it, will try to move. So he has a camcorder on his TV recording this instance, I guess for proof for some reason. There's like a camcorder plugged into the TV. I don't know why. But when he does this, a flashlight occurs. They get a call from their parents' primitive cell phone in their car saying that they've narrowly avoided the truck accident and they missed the movie, so they're going to be on their way home soon. And the kids think that the camera's gone, so they must have settled the issue. But the gremlin or creature that was whatever was inside the camera might have moved to the camcorder in the TV, and there's a whole climax of them trying to resolve that. And something may happen to this creature inside of the TV/camcorder. And it kind of ends on a cliffhanger of what's going to happen next. And then the Midnight Society closes out the episode, you know, does their thing, have a few laughs, put out the fire, and then the episode ends. So that's pretty much what you'll expect out of the Tale of the Curious Camera. So let's start off with the positives. I think the acting in this episode was actually some of the best I've seen in Are You Afraid of the Dark? Eddie K. Thomas, who plays the main character, like I said, I forget this kid's name, but he did a pretty great job. It was so fun seeing Richard McMillan play the yearbook photographer. I think his character was absolute gold. The concept of the camera in this story, I hate to do this, but comparing it to Say Cheese and Die, I think the operations of it is way more clear than what Say Cheese and Die was. This camera causes bad things to happen. So if you take a picture of something, that thing is going to be ruined, so on and so forth, right? And having like that monster inside of the camera idea is very playful, and it's also a very easy cop-out, but I don't mean that in a negative sense, to say why it's able to have these supernatural abilities. And Gremlin, you know, they have powers of like, you know, healing and teleporting and all that stuff in like mythology, I think. So it makes sense why the camera's indestructible. It makes sense why the Gremlin can will bad things to happen, bring bad luck to people's lives, stuff like that. And I think that's a really cool concept. And the one thing I think this episode excels at is giving you a character who goes through bullying on a regular basis and kind of prods at the idea that they can use this camera to get some revenge in some type of Billy from Calling All Creeps kind of way, right? So it's kind of like we're watching the birth of maybe a sociopath. And that would be kind of controversial to say. I don't really think it's all that way. I think the episode definitely could have leaned into that a whole lot more. But I like that the idea is there, that he was contemplating on using it for terrible things. And I don't think that really takes away from his character, given that pretty much all the other school characters around this kid are awful to him for no reason. So, yeah, it definitely has a lot of Ricky from Calling All Creeps vibes, which I dig. And honestly, the twist involving the monster and how it's able to go through device to device reminds me of being an electropath or something like that. And I love electropath stories. So I think that idea is really cool. Kind of wish there was maybe a sequel episode to this, or maybe this was a two-parter to kind of follow up on it, because this kind of concept I think really works. So yeah, have a lot of compliments to it. Pretty much a very structurally sound episode. But I do have two negatives that are here, unfortunately. The first negative is the origins behind the camera are pretty much non-existent, but you do get a sense that the camera had an owner of the yearbook photographer for some time. So it came from him getting to the kid, which is at least understandable, and at least that person was a character in the story. But I kind of wish we knew a little more backstory into it. I think that would have been kind of fun to see. Maybe they look into the mythos of the Gremlin a little more, and anything just would have been interesting to see. But it wasn't there, and I'm kind of bummed about that. Not the biggest thing ever, because there is still more to chew on than a lot of object-centered stories in both Goosebumps and Are You Afraid of the Dark and other kids' horror stories. But yeah, woulda, coulda, shoulda. But I think the biggest negative I have, and it's not even that big, there are some dark elements in the story, but comparing this one to something like Say Cheese and Die, which, if we're looking at the book, Say Cheese and Die's book has very somewhat violent scenes in it. And I feel like this episode has some semblance of violence, some graphic things happening, but nothing too out of the unordinary, right? So it kind of feels tame with some of the things that the camera was doing. And I wish that it kind of swung for the fences a little more. I know this is a 90s show. It aired on Nickelodeon. But some episodes in Are You Afraid of the Dark were able to do some darker implications. Like, have you ever seen the episode The Tale of the Night Shift? An episode that I quite love and I have yet to review on this channel. You see people getting bitten by a vampire, right? And you see bite marks on their neck. you understand that these people are undead, and you're at least willing to show some semblance of gore, right? If you've ever seen The Tale of the Dead Man's Float, you're able to see like a graphic looking monster, and you have a really creepy backstory about kids drowning in a swimming pool, right? And you actually kind of show a kid drowning. I mean, like, if you can pull that stuff off, then why aren't you doing a little more darker things with the camera? You know, I know these episodes came in later seasons, specifically like season 5, but, you know, for a season 3 episode, I think they might have still been kind of wary of what to do in certain episodes and all that, which is fine to a degree. But I think if it had a little more edge to it, this would have scored way higher, in my opinion. And I might have been forgiving on the origin thing and probably given this like a perfect score. But given what we got, honestly, this is one of the better Are You Afraid of the Dark episodes I have come across in some time. I'm quite impressed with this. With those issues I have, though, I still thought that this was an A tier episode. So I was at least willing to give this about a 4.5 out of 5 or higher. And I'm actually surprised when I say this. I actually settled on a pretty solid score for this. I only deducted 0.4 off the top, and I gave this episode a 4.6 out of 5 stars, which is a lower A, but it's still kind of in the middle. You know, this is a solid kids horror story. And yes, to address the elephant in the room, some people want to attack Say Cheese and Die in this episode from Are You Afraid of the Dark for being like the Twilight Zone episode, The Most Unusual Camera, or whatever it's called. And I'll say this. I've seen that episode, and I would still take this episode and Say Cheese and Die book and episode over that Twilight Zone segment any day. I think these are way more interesting concepts, and I like them more. They just have more charm, and they're not as boring. So take that for what you will. If that upsets a few people that like that story, so be it. But that's just how I feel. And honestly, you know, since Say Cheese and Die, again, is as infamous as it is, I kind of wish that we just got this as like an unofficial Say Cheese and Die 2 or something like that with a whole new camera idea or whatnot. Or maybe a similar idea, different camera. I don't care. This would have worked in that like same vein, in my opinion. So yeah, that's my thoughts on the Tale of the Curious Camera. Let me know down in the comment section if you've seen this episode before. Do you love it? Do you hate it? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.